Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg.
I'm Joel.
You all know Teddy, who is currently watching the people who live across the street from us as they clean the leaves up from their yard because it's fall. Yes. We are here to do a reading wrap-up for the month of October. We'll talk a little bit about what we want to read in November. I know you had a very light reading month.
Very light reading month.
Because stress.
Stress, travel,
yeah.
And I was not traveling in a car, so I didn't have all my audio time.
Yeah, and we should note, if you are watching this video on the day that it is published, it's going to be published on Election Day. So if you need a distraction from election updates and news reports and all that, grab yourself a cup of tea, a coffee, a cocktail, a mocktail, whatever you would like, and come escape the world with us and an adorable fluffy dog.
Or grab a puppy and just sit here and watch us.
Or grab a puppy. He's my emotional support dog. He is. So
let's get into this little wrap up. It seems like we were just here yesterday.
It does.
I'm sorry, but this month flew.
It really did. And just the year has flown because we're not far from Thanksgiving. This is going to be an exciting month, November, in general, for bookish things, because next week we get the winner of the Booker Prize. The week after that, we get the winner of the National Book Award. We're going to start getting best of the year lists at the end of the month. I am excited.
And we're putting up a Christmas tree next week.
We had a whole thing because we wanted to decide when to put up the Christmas tree. This year we decided we were going to do it the week after Halloween, the weekend after Halloween, which is now, but you're traveling.
I'm traveling. So I'm traveling this week. I'll be home next week. So we're going to put it up the week I get to stay home.
So basically, if we had put it up today or yesterday, because we're filming this on Sunday, we would put it up just in time for him to leave and not get to enjoy it. Yeah. So it makes more sense. Yeah. But let's talk about November.
Yeah, let's talk about books.
I am going to I'm going to try to be very brief talking about the books that I've read, because every time I say that I talk at length. I'm a talker. He knows this.
I'm hearing this and I want to hear this.
Yeah, exactly. If you know, you know.
You know.
So I'll try to link some of my Friday reads down below where I talk about some of my books in a bit more depth, and we'll go from there. Do you want me to go first? Since I
really have nothing.
So my first one was this book, Brightly Shining, which we got in Portland at the Pacific Northwest Booksellers Association. This is an advanced reader's copy, but this book is available now in stores, so there will be affiliate links to all of the books that we talk about where?
Down below.
Down below. So you can go check this out on bookshop.org if it sounds interesting to you. I think if you're a fan of Claire Keegan's Small Things Like These, you will like this because it is a very unsentimental Christmas story, and it is obviously set at Christmas. The protagonists work in a Christmas tree lot. It's about two young girls who are struggling. One of them is 16. I can't remember the age of the other one, like somewhere between 9 and 11. And basically their father is very unreliable, and he gets a job at a Christmas tree lot at the urging of one of his daughters, and then things are good for about a week, and then he starts disappearing. So the daughters basically volunteer to fill in his spot at the Christmas tree lot in order to make money to survive. And it's about the kindnesses that they experience from some people and the cruelty and indifference that they experience from other people. So it's a really beautiful book. I am sort of deliberately avoiding pronouncing the name of the author. I had looked online. Somebody did comment to tell me how to pronounce it, and I confess I still don't really understand. So rather than mispronounce it, I am just going to leave it as is. And it's translated from the Norwegian by Carolyn Waite. It was a very good book. I read it so quickly. The plane ride from Portland to Missoula, I think I had 10 pages left by the time we got off the plane.
It's a beautiful cover.
Gorgeous cover. Very stunning.
Love that.
So if you're looking for a holiday read that's not sentimental, I would say that fits very neatly in with Small Things Like These.
I'm going to do it in December.
Yeah, it's a very quick read. Yeah. So, do you want to go, or do you want me to go?
Go ahead, because mine all blend together.
And they kind of blend with some of mine too. So everything. Oh, I just hit him in the nose with my little notepad. He didn't care though, so I could have just pretended it didn't happen. My next one was Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle. That had been on the long list for the Booker Prize, and the New York Times Book Review has been raving about it. I read it, and I liked it. I thought it was sort of unnecessarily overly written in some parts, like a little more complicated than it had to be. I liked it. I didn't love it, and I think that's pretty much all. I'll link the Friday Reads where I talk about it in greater detail down below. We don't have to focus in on that one. So
Go for your next one.
go for my next one. The next one is Catalina by. This time I knew you were going to do it, but if you've ever seen Overboard, you know.
You know.
Catalina by Carla Cornejo Villavicencio. This was on the long list for the National Book Award, and it immediately jumped out to me as something that I would like to read. It is one of those early adulthood books where it is about a woman in college who just doesn't know what she wants to do with her life, but she's figuring out what kind of adult she wants to be and all of that, what she wants her life to be. But it's complicated because she is an illegal immigrant. She's been in the country since she was about 5. And her grandparents who have raised her are also in the country illegally. So she is able to go to school. This is during the Obama era. She's able to go to school at Harvard based on the DREAM Act, basically. She is a dreamer. And that is what is allowing her to go to college in this country. But she also knows when she graduates, without citizenship, she does not have a legal right to a job. That complicates things. She sort of spirals into some depression, makes a lot of bad decisions in her life. And it was a really interesting book. I absolutely see why it was on the long list for the National Book Award. I do also see why it did not make it onto the short list. So that was Catalina by Carla Cornejo Villavicencio. Do you want to do your first?
Yeah,
because I'm almost halfway through.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do my first. My first one was Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. We both read the third book of the series.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I love this book. It was probably one of my favorites. So I went back to book number 1, and we are going to kind of get through this again. So I started with book number 1.
Yeah.
Beautiful story. I absolutely loved it. And it really kind of falls into place. Yes, it's a rom-com, but there is something heavier behind the scenes in all her books.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciated how she deals with some of the issues, but then the rom-com is the fluffy part of it that brings it kind of all together.
And it makes you feel good. It makes you feel emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know we did mention that last month because I had read it in September.
Right.
And you finished it in October, and it's going to come. The series is going to come up again. What was the third book in the series that
The third book was Just for the Summer, which we both read. Loved it.
Yeah. Someone commented to say that the first Abby Jimenez book you read is always your favorite, and I think that's bearing out because for both of us, it's still Just for the Summer.
And I've read all 3. You're working on the third.
I'm working on the third.
Really fun book. Yes. Highly recommend it. Even if you're not a rom-com reader, but you want just complex characters and some emotional stuff, it's good, but it's happy.
And one thing I talked about a lot in my Friday Reads about both books and in our wrap-up from last month is that I've learned something about myself or something useful to my life from those books. And that's why I get annoyed when people discount genre books, especially romance, because Just for the Summer helped me get perspective on how our foster son felt, because the female main character was a foster child and had grown up in a foster family and had a complicated relationship with her biological mother, which is a gross understatement. Had a lot of emotional baggage that she carried from that, and it helped us understand our foster son a little bit better. And then Part of Your World, actually, like Abby Jimenez doesn't know me, and it's not the same. Like my family's not super wealthy. They are not power people in a giant hospital system reminiscent of the Mayo Clinic, but aspects of the female protagonist's relationship with her family remind me of my own family and helped me process some of that.
They have expectations of you feel like you need to live up to, but it's not what you want to do.
Yeah.
So
you find your own
I thought
way.
It was handled beautifully about it too.
So you find your own way and end up married to a man in Montana with an adorable fluffy dog.
Hey, bud.
Tell me I'm wrong.
All right, what's next?
Next is The Burrow by Melanie Chang. You got it?
You're holding.
And I I liked this book. I didn't love it. It's but a novella actually. It's a tiny little thing. You could dunk it in your coffee, but it's about a family that's grieving. That is 4 years earlier from when the book begins. They had lost a baby in an accident, not to illness, to an accident that happened in the house, and the details of that accident sort of get teased out throughout. But it's also set during the pandemic, and a lot of the themes and metaphors and things are a little too on the nose. Like, it's using the pandemic and the isolation that came from lockdown to show how this family has withdrawn from the rest of the world because of their grief. The front of the house is covered in tarp because they had been renovating the house when they lost the baby, and now they just haven't made any progress on the renovations ever since. So you can sort of see how they're stagnating in their grief. And then the grandmother is not forced, but also not, there isn't too much of a choice in the situation. She breaks an arm, and it is advised that she is not capable of living alone while she recovers, so she ends up in the house, which raises some tensions, especially about the nature of the accident that happened. But I just think that the book doesn't really add anything to a conversation about grief. As people who have been through grief journeys over the last 3 years, it didn't show me anything I didn't already know. It didn't help me understand anything a little bit differently. It's certainly not in the way that Part of Your World and Just for the Summer helped me understand things about the world better. Yeah. But it's a good book. I would just say it felt a little expected for me. Do you want me to do my next one?
Yep.
It is Whatever Happened to Interracial Love, a story collection by Kathleen Collins. These are sometimes very short stories. The longest one is 30 pages, but some of them are 2 to 3 pages. It's a very tiny book. And I had been wanting to read it for a while, and I used the excuse of a book haul revisit, because if I had read that one, I would have had a perfect score for the month in which I hauled it originally. I think Teddy might want down.
Yeah,
he's looking at the floor like he just wants to go, so we're going to let Teddy go.
He's going to yell at the neighbors.
He's like, what are they doing? So all of the stories are very experimental in nature. And I think if you're not a short story person, this is not a starting point for you. If you're open to, if you do like short stories, or if you're open to experimental fiction, because like the very first story in the collection is told sort of as a director observing and planning to film and filming a couple who had, basically an affair has just been discovered, and it's 2 pages, but it's told in a very interesting way. But it's experimental, so how you react to it will differ wildly. So I thought it was fascinating. I didn't love it, but I thought it was fascinating. So that was Whatever Happened to Interracial Love.
Do your next one, because it kind of then will tie into mine.
Okay. So the next, I actually read The Kamigawa Food Detectives by Hisashi Kashiway and translated by Jesse Kirkwood. And then I finished another book in between that and The Restaurant of Lost Recipes by Hisashi Kashiway, translated by Jesse Kirkwood. But it's just easier to talk about The Kamigawa Food Detectives and this one together, because they're very similar. And I really appreciated these because it's very cozy. It fits the vibe of the moment that I needed. I needed things to kind of settle me down and help me not think about the world and distract me. And even on the back of this book, the Chicago Review of Books had called The Kamigawa Food Detectives the cozy literary equivalent of a hearty stew on a cold day. Yes. And it's very much about food. Basically, the Kamigawa Diner is run by a father and a daughter who is 30, and they have a restaurant side to it, but they also have a service that you can come to them and say, my wife, like the very first story in the Kamigawa Food Detectives is someone coming and saying, my wife made these delicious noodles, and people have tried to make them ever since, but it never tastes the same. So I'm about to get remarried, but I feel like if I can have the noodles the way she made them one last time, it'll make me feel better. It'll make me feel like I can kind of close one chapter and begin another one. And that is one of the things that's really good about the series. It understands food and the emotional connections we have to food the memories that are tied to food, how food can be tied up in your personal relationships. Like the best carbonara I have ever had. I could have gone a lot of directions with
I
that.
know you could have.
Best carbonara I ever had was in an alleyway in Rome that we just kind of stumbled on, and it's something that is tied up with Joel because you were there for me. One of our favorite meals we've ever had was at a restaurant called Mishi's.
Yes.
We did the tasting menu.
We did the tasting menu. Michelle Bernstein has a restaurant, Michi's, in Florida. Now it's closed. She's opening their new one.
Is she?
Yeah, but I haven't looked at the menu.
Yeah.
And this menu was beautifully thought out. It was very caring about how everything was made and presented. And we had a carbonara there. That was probably one of our favorite carbonaras. But when it came, it had a poached egg on top.
Yeah.
And then David, the waiter, got in there and broke it up with the forks. And then it got all that egg yolk to blend in with all that creamy and the pasta.
Yeah.
Not only was it a beautiful tableside something, it added a whole nother level to the pasta. And it was just beautiful. Now I can't make carbonara without an egg for him.
Yeah, it's true. And actually that ties back. Like the carbonara that I had in Rome, it was the best carbonara I've ever had. But it ties back to the memory of that carbonara because I had only ever had carbonara with like the egg already mixed in.
Yeah.
I had never had it with the egg getting broken and mixed into the pasta as part of the process. So like all of this food and emotion and relationship is tied into carbonara for me. So the books very much deal with that because food is not, I mean, there are people who think of food as just food, something you need to eat, and that's fine. But food is also emotional. There are foods that you are attached to from your childhood, like cookies and milk. I am such a huge fan of cookies and milk because whenever I slept at my grandmother's house, she would make such a big production about like, we're going to have cookies and milk and then we're going to go to bed. And cookies and milk it's such a simple thing, but it's my favorite dessert. Yeah. So that is very much where this is.
And as Greg, being the thoughtful person he is, has started a tradition in our house. My mother passed away in 2000, and Greg didn't get to meet her. And so every year for Mom's birthday, Mother's Day, we will do something Mom used to make all the time.
Yeah.
And then we would tell stories about Mom.
Yeah.
And it kind of brings back the love I have for food, the love of cooking because my mother and my grandmother both taught me how to cook, and just the family recipes that are just come back to us that mean a lot to me, and I think they become something to Greg too.
Yeah.
That we just really get emotionally involved with food.
It helps me feel like I know your mom, even though I never actually got to meet her. Right. And it's wonderful. And both books tie into that sort of relationship with food. So each story, somebody comes to the restaurant, they have a food that they would like recreated, and then they come back 2 weeks later and try what the people have come up with. I will say, I'm not usually the type of person who will read a series back to back to back. Like, notice I read Just for the Summer in July?
July.
And then I read Part of Your World in September. And then I've read a bunch of books in between Part of Your World. And now I'm reading Yours Truly. That's how I usually operate if I like a series. It's unusual for me to read one book and jump to the next. I would actually recommend a little bit of space between them, because if I have a complaint about this, the one complaint is every single story hits the exact same plot beats. And if you read just the Kamigawa Food Detectives, it's fine. If you read just the Restaurant of Lost Recipes, it's fine. If you read them back to back, by the time you get about halfway through the Restaurant of Lost Recipes, you start to feel like these are essentially all the same, just with some of the details mixed up. So I'd say space them out. But I also talked in my Friday Reads about how because they are so familiar and structured in that way, it does actually add to the coziness of it. I compared it to the Golden Girls. Yeah. You can watch any episode of the Golden Girls, doesn't matter where it was in the run of the show. That's why it can be such a great show to rewatch, because you can pick up at any episode. It doesn't matter. It's the same cozy show. Somebody actually commented and said that they have like a random number generator, like 1 through however many episodes of the Golden Girls. So they will use that, and whatever it lands on is the episode that they will watch that night.
Huh.
You can do that with the Golden Girls, and you could kind of do that with these stories, because you don't even really have to read them in order. But there's also a really sweet element, because the father and the daughter who works at the restaurant, the mother / wife had died about 5 years earlier, and they have an altar to her in the restaurant, and she is a part of every story, and they sort of honor her memory. So it's really beautiful. So it was really cute.
So, you done?
Yes.
Okay, so going from Greg's food book, I went into The Pairing by Casey McQuiston.
Which is the book I finished between the Kamigawa Food Detectives and the Restaurant of Lost Recipes. So this is perfect. Go.
And again, it's a story about food, and it doesn't play a big part in it, but it does bring a lot of the emotion into it. So you have a woman who is a sommelier, a man who is a pastry chef. They dated, and something happens, and they tease it out throughout the book, and they broke up. So, but they broke up the day before they were supposed to go on a food tour. So 4 years later, they both have a voucher to go on a food tour. They says, well, I'm just going to do it now. I feel good. Well, they end up next to each other, and they go through the food tour together.
Yeah, because this is the last tour that they will be eligible to reuse the voucher. Right. If they don't use it this time, they lose it completely.
Yeah, so it has a 4-year expiration date, and we're 4 years.
Yeah.
So they start in Paris, and they go through the food scene of Paris. They go up to...
they go to a couple of places in France.
Yeah, Lyon. Some places in France.
They go to Barcelona,
Spain, over to Italy, down through Italy. And every place they go to is a big food destination. And they talk about the food and the things they do. And it brought up a lot of memories. They were in Rio Maggiore, where we were.
Yes. They went to Manarola, where we had an exhausting hike.
And when you've been to these places, you really can relate. It's like, this is true.
Yeah.
I read One Italian Summer.
Yeah.
And it was exactly everything we did.
Yeah.
So it meant a lot in the book.
You got so excited when we got to Positano and we walked down by the waterfront. There was a restaurant there. I want to say it was named the Black Mermaid or something like that. Black Pearl, something like that. Yeah. And you got all excited because they mentioned that restaurant in the book. Yeah. So, yeah.
So it was bringing some really good food, some really good travel, and a lot of baggage.
Yeah.
They both had a lot of baggage. And again, like any rom-com, just a good old conversation would have cured up all of this.
A lot of that.
But it made a fun book.
And I think one of the things that's fun with it is a lot of rom-coms, including the 3 Abby Jimenez books that we've read in this series, they will have a chapter from Joel's perspective, a chapter from my perspective, and then back and forth and back and forth. In The Pairing, you start with Theo. The first half of the book is from Theo's perspective, and then it switches to Kit's perspective for the second half. So you sort of like get to know what their relationship had been, what Theo's perception of it ending had been, and then it flips in the second half, and you get Kit's perception. And I actually really liked that.
I thought it was very cool because you go into the argument of Theo's perspective, and then Kit talks about his perspective, and it's completely different. Yeah. And it's just like, but when you put it all together, you can see where they got to this point.
Yes.
And it was actually a really good book.
It really was. I was glad that I read it because I had been I talked about this in my Friday reads, and I know a lot of people commented and said that they had been put off the book for the same reason. The way the book is marketed and the way it is explained is that when they find themselves on this food tour together, they start, in order to prove how okay they are hanging out with each other despite the breakup, they have a competition to see who can sleep with the most people as they go about the tour. That sounded very like frat boy and gross to me, so I didn't plan on reading the book, but you read it.
But it's a part of the book, but it's one I just totally forgot.
Yeah. Focus completely on other things.
Yeah, so we really get into the food, the travel, and the communication. Yeah. You kind of forget about it.
And I think because most of that happens in the first half of the book when you're in Theo's perspective. And the way it comes across is not like a frat boy, gross, misogynistic type thing. It's more about the emotion that Theo feels for Kit and how, like, basically they feel desperate to try to prove that they're okay. And that is the angle Casey McQuiston focuses on. Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
More than anything.
Yeah.
So it's not the gross frat boy thing that it sounds like at all. And go ahead.
I think it would turn into a really good movie about food.
Yeah.
And put the sleeping thing in the background.
Yeah.
But if you really kind of do this book on the food and the relationship and the communication, I think it would make a beautiful movie.
Yeah. I think a marketing person just decided that the sex competition was a much better hook for people, although it clearly turned us off initially. It turned a lot of people in my comment section off, so I'd say for sure. The other thing I really liked about the pairing is that Theo starts out bisexual in the first half of the book, and over the course of it transitions to deciding to identify as non-binary. And the way it's handled is so sweet and affirming, and I really appreciated that.
So Theo,
Theodora Flower Day is the full name. Yeah.
So Theo is a female in the start.
Yeah.
And then they identify as non-binary. Kit is also bisexual, but male. And so that's what makes the competition they have kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Because everybody's fair game for them.
Yeah, it is. And Casey McQuiston is also non-binary. So I think the way it's handled is so sweet, because actually in the beginning of the book, I frequently forgot that Theo was living as a female at that point, because the way Theo is written is non-binary. It just takes a couple of chapters for even Theo to catch up with, I really don't understand my own gender, I feel like, and deciding to identify as non-binary. So it puts you in the space of like, right, non-binary makes sense for Theo, because Casey McQuiston has already put you in the space where what Theo is very fluid and not easily defined as one or the other. So I thought that was handled really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great book. I really loved it.
Yes, I agree. So that was the book that I had finished between the Kamigawa Food Detectives and the Restaurant of Lost Recipes. I have two more.
Okay, go.
So do you want? Okay. The next one I did was actually an audio, and it's another book that you read. You actually read it before me. It's Fall for Him by Andy Burke.
Oh, yes.
So this one, my complaint about this one is that I think it's overly complicated in the plot structure. However, it is still a fun, sweet rom-com. If you need cinnamon bun vibes, it hits all of the beats that you would need, all of the beeps, all of the beats that you would need in a cinnamon bun.
So the opening line is basically the guy living upstairs is working on his house, and the floor got wet, and the floor just collapsed under him, and he falls into the bed of another man.
Yeah.
And they're both gay.
Yeah.
And falls into the bed of the other man. Well, they don't like each other.
Yes.
They don't know why they don't like each other. They each have their own perception of why they don't like each other. And so now there's a hole in the ceiling, the bedroom's destroyed, so they are forced to share an apartment upstairs.
Yeah.
And
because for one
the
thing, neither one of them actually purchased these apartments, and that's part of where the backstory starts to get overly complicated. Like, these are not their apartments. The upper apartment where the guy falls through the floor was his uncle's apartment, and his uncle began to suffer from dementia, and the apartment started to fall apart, essentially. So he is staying there to quietly fix up the apartment so the HOA won't find out about the damage in the apartment. And that's why the floor was kind of weakened. The guy in the lower apartment, I don't even remember. It was his sister's apartment?
His sister's,
yes. So he ends up staying in there. He also has a dog that had belonged to a friend who died. and the dog is not allowed to live in this apartment. So again, he has stuff that he needs to hide from the HOA. So they sort of agree to team up to hide the things that they're hiding from the HOA while they repair the apartments.
And of course, the HOA is just a busybody who just wants to be in everybody's business.
Who's literally named Karen.
It's a fun book.
It is a fun book, even with the parts of it that are, I would say, could have been simplified. Like, both of them have very complicated family dynamics.
Yeah.
The reason one doesn't like the other requires a lot of elaborate backstory that you have to work
Too much
through.
elaborate.
Yeah. However, it's like this is one of those situations where I complain a lot about something I actually did like, because I think it could have been a lot simpler, but I enjoyed it at the end of the day.
Like
And if
a
Andy,
complicated family.
I do love something about a complicated family.
And among all this, the gentleman who lived upstairs has ADHD. And so you learn how to see a person dealing with something and how they manage it.
Yeah.
And then you got to learn how to read that person to understand that.
Yeah, that's going to come up again.
Which is going to come up again.
It's going to come up again. Get ready.
So, yeah,
All right,
fun book.
It was, yeah. And I complained about it a lot, but if I don't even know if Andy Burke has other books, but I would read another book by Andy Burke.
I would too, yeah.
Yeah, so if that tells you anything. All right, the
Why don't
last
you-
book that I finished in October was Mississippi Sissy by Kevin Sessoms. This is something I've had since it came out in paperback, and I checked the copyright in my most recent Friday Reads. It came out in 2007, so I've had this book a long time without
Longer than
reading
me.
it. Yeah, I've had this book longer than I've had Joel. And I finally got around to reading it. And Gwen Walls, Tim Walls' wife, inspired me to read it, because in a lot of the videos that were shared after Tim Walls was announced as Kamala's VP pick, one of the things they did is during lockdown, they did like a book club from their house where they would talk about what they had been reading that week while they were staying home. And in that video, Gwen had read Mississippi Sissy. Now, we're not going to talk about politics anymore, because this is an escape from politics if you need it. This is obviously a memoir by Kevin Sessoms, who grew up in Mississippi. What do you know? And was gay. What do you know? And it's a very good book. I was reading another book at the same time that started hitting some beats where, because he is kind of flamboyantly gay, like obviously gay, as a child, he faces a lot of bullying. He faces a lot of abuse. So there are a lot of trigger warnings, because there is also sexual abuse in this book that he experiences. And it is bookended with the murder of Frank Haynes and how he discovers the body. So it opens with him finding the body and then flashes back to his childhood and how he was this carefree, happy, very gay little boy who loved watching What's My Line and was so obsessed with Arlene Francis that he would pretend to be her and wouldn't respond to his mother or grandmother if they didn't call him Arlene. And the details of that are so cute. He insists he's going to wear a witch costume for Halloween. And it's about, he is very willful. And a lot of people, I also talked about this in my Friday Reads, a lot of people in this, yes, it will be down below. A lot of people in the face of that sort of shame and criticism and bullying would shrink inside of themselves. And in some ways, he just becomes more determined to be himself. And it's a really interesting, inspiring tale. It can be difficult for some of the things that he goes through. And then it loops back around to when he's 19 and he's in college and he meets Frank Haynes, who was a journalist and also very gay, and in a literary circle with Eudora Welty, who is part of the Pulitzer family of authors. So she's kind of in elements of this book, which is a fun little connection for me. The only complaint I have is that obviously Kevin Sessoms wrote this book much later in his life, and it doesn't have much context or reflection on anything that's happened to him since. It's really just about what happened. And I feel like I would have appreciated a little bit more of that sort of context and reflection on his life. So, but very good book, and I'm glad I finally got around to reading it. So, okay. And
Do you want to go ahead?
well, so I'm carrying that book into November. So
Oh, okay.
you
Okay.
finished this one,
I
and I'm
finished this
currently
one.
reading it. So let's finish with yours.
Okay. So yours truly, Abby Jimenez,
Surprise.
is number 2 in the series of 3.
Yeah.
I read 3, 1, then 2.
Yeah.
Still a good book. Again, it's a rom-com, but there's issues going on behind the scene. And we were talking earlier about mental health issues. And the lead in this, or the male protagonist, has those issues. And his past girlfriend didn't understand him and did everything to make him feel uncomfortable. And then he meets a lovely lady who they're just friends in the beginning, who understands him, can look at his face and know what he's feeling. And it's just like, it's not that hard to be that supportive of somebody if you know what they're going through.
And meet someone on their level.
Yeah.
Because, so he has anxiety, like crippling anxiety, very bad. He has to manage that in all ways. So one of the problems he would have with his girlfriend. Now, this is not a spoiler because I'm very early in the audio of this book, and I've gotten to this part. But part of the problem with his relationship is she would say, let's go out to a restaurant, let's go out to a bar, and she would take him to places that made him feel uncomfortable because loud, busy, crowded restaurants would add to his anxiety and make him feel very uncomfortable. And then if he ever told her, can we leave? I don't feel comfortable here. She would be mystified. Like, I don't understand why this is a problem for you. And he meets Brianna, a nurse at the, not a nurse.
She's a doctor.
She's a doctor. That's my bad.
They're both ER doctors.
They're both ER doctors. And there's a bit of a misunderstanding at first that makes her not like him, but when she very quickly, they sort of correct it and he reveals he has anxiety. So she writes him a note and leaves it for him because she immediately just understands, I want to clear the air and have a conversation with him, but it's going to be difficult for him to talk to me about this. So she writes him a note. And he writes her a note back. So their relationship begins with them passing notes back and forth and sort of getting to know each other through that because she inherently understands that that's a better way for him to communicate. And it's lovely.
It is. Now, do you know, you're like chapter 3 or so. Do you know what's going on with his ex now?
Yes, in the very first chapter where you meet him, I assume you're talking about how she's marrying his brother.
Yes.
Yeah. In his first chapter is about them telling him that.
So he's now dealing with his ex-girlfriend marrying his brother.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of anxiety, I would say.
Especially because his family keeps checking in with him like, are you okay? Should we be mad at him? Or let's not go to the wedding.
We hate her.
And he's kind of like,
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Again, it's a great little rom-com story, but there's a backstory to it.
Yes.
And there's another backstory to it, which is super interesting.
On Brianna's side.
Oh, no.
Oh.
On Brianna's side. But it's very relevant to the book and who wrote it. So.
Yeah. So the way this is all playing out, let's run through really quickly.
Because you guys need to do this.
So we read the third one first. I actually don't think you really need to do them in order because if you read them in order, totally fine. One thing I really liked about reading Just for the Summer first is there's something that happens later on. Can't talk about it because it would be a spoiler. There's something that happens later on in the book that if you haven't read the first two, is a giant plot twist. When I got there, I was like,
yeah.
But if you've read the first two books, you kind of know where the connection is actually going to come. So, do it whichever way you would like. I think you're fine going out of order. I actually have liked reading Just for the Summer first and then going back.
I did too.
Yeah.
So the progression is Alexis in the first book is a doctor.
Yes.
Her best friend is Brianna, who is also a doctor.
Yeah.
And then Brianna's story goes on, and then the third character gets tied into the other two that you don't know about the characters here.
Yeah.
A little bit. But the characters do all come together to play with each other.
Technically, the real linking system is this hospital system that's sort of like the Mayo Clinic. It's called the Royum Clinic or something like that. And Alexis's family, they have been almost like founders of it. Yeah. Brianna works at it. Emma, the female protagonist of Just for the Summer, is basically a traveling nurse. She travels to hospitals that need someone to fill in for a period of time. she comes to this hospital system just for the summer to fill in.
But Brianna's brother in this book is good friends with Justin in this book.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. So,
Yeah.
Oh my God! That Jeremiah? I didn't know that. Okay,
Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Look at that. So it's fun. It's
So
fun.
all books tease the next character coming out.
Yeah, because she has another one coming out next year, and you meet that character, the woman who's going to be the protagonist in that book, in Just for the Summer. And you can kind of, from meeting her in Just for the Summer, you can see how it's probably going to tie into the hospital system as well.
So it's her best friend, right?
No. When the two protagonists go on a date, they meet a woman whose mother, they meet a woman at a bus stop who's confused, clearly has some form of dementia, and they manage to track down her daughter, and her daughter comes to pick her up. The daughter is the female protagonist of the book that's coming out.
Oh, okay.
So,
Fine.
yeah. So that's how it's going to go. Now, in terms of, here's something I'm carrying into the month of October. It's Salamlik by Khaled Al-Ismail, translated from the Arabic by Larry Price. I'm just going to hold it down here because I don't think there's anything wrong with the cover, but I don't want to make people uncomfortable.
There's pubic hair.
There's pubic hair. So there's not nudity, but it might make some people uncomfortable. But anyway, this is something I had been reading before I picked up Mississippi Sissy, and it hits a lot of the same beats. So as for my own mental health, I kind of needed to pick one and go with it. So I went with the audio that I was listening to. And now I have gone back to Salam. This is a great book.
I can't wait to read that one and the Christmas one.
I am really enjoying it because it's about a man who grows up in Syria and obviously has difficulties being gay in Syria. And as he's growing up and trying to come out and have the relationships in hiding with men, he discovers bathhouses. And in the present, he is in Sweden, where he is living as a refugee, and he's sort of waiting. He's in this holding period where he's trying to find out if he is going to be granted asylum and allowed to stay. And it sort of moves back and forth between the timelines, and it is a very poignant story and powerful. I'm really enjoying it so far. I'm about halfway at this point. And the parts of him exploring the sort of underground gay scene in Syria and finding ways to connect with other men remind me of classic LGBTQ plus novels like Dancer from the Dance by Andrew Halloran, City of Night by John Rishi. I would say this is a book that stands next to them, at least so far. So I am loving it, and I'm going to be finishing it in November. I almost forgot what month we're in.
Yeah.
And then when I'm done with that, I'm going to be reading The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey. I had mentioned in my Friday reads that I'm going to do a sort of group read with this, but it's going to be a very low pressure. So when I finish Salam, I will post on the community tab here and in a story on Instagram to let you know that I'm done, and it will be starting The Snow Child. If you want to read along, you can. And then when I do my Friday reads, we can have a conversation about it in the comments. So that's my plan for my next book. It is sort of in the Eowyn Ivey way. It takes inspiration from fairy tales and myth, and it's set in Alaska, but it's grounded in realism. I think a lot of people have commented on the fact that they either don't want to read something inspired by fantasy, or that they've wanted a book that was more fantasy, and what they got is very realistic. So they're kind of two sides of the coin. But there's a couple in Alaska who they build a snow child. They have been unable to have a child. And then the next day, the snow child they created is gone, but they start seeing this little blonde girl living in the woods. And it sort of spins out from there. And I've heard wonderful things about it. Eowyn Ivey has a book coming out next year, so she was at the trade show that we were at.
Okay.
And I mentioned in the Friday reads, we stood next to her, but we didn't actually meet her because Chelsea, who we were with, recognized her because she read the book that's coming out.
I was willing to take you up and say, hi, my husband is shy.
Yeah.
And he really likes your books and is very excited to meet you. So,
But I felt bad about that because I haven't actually read her book. I was just really interested in reading it. So I chickened out.
I know.
I chickened out.
I should have drugged you over.
I have a history of panicking when I meet an author.
And Tina Fey.
Yeah, Tina Fey is the prime example. We'll talk about that someday.
I am going into November reading The Merriest
Mister? Yeah.
Gay couple. I read briefly what it is, but a gay couple, they knock out Santa Claus, so they have to take over for Santa Claus.
Oh.
And finish his job. And I don't think they're getting along when they start this. So I don't know. It sounds a little twisted, fun, cinnamon bunny, Christmassy.
I know now that we're through spooky season, we always treat, well, you do like Halloween.
I do.
But I think we're always waiting to jump into Christmas. Like Elton John, we're just waiting to step into Christmas.
Yep.
So I think you had mentioned that you might want to spend a lot of time in November with some queer holiday romance.
Or just any holiday romance or holiday stories. There's a Christmas murder mystery I want to read. I'm just going to do Christmas stuff.
Yeah. We all need a break from stress.
Yeah.
So
we have a lot going on in our personal lives. So I think we just need to relax and enjoy some stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, hopefully you have gotten some escapism from this if you're watching this the day that it posted. If you're not watching this the day it posted, I hope you've enjoyed it anyway.
Yeah.
And been able to spend some time with us. So we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
We'll see how November goes. And as always, we really appreciate your time, and we will be back. Until next time, happy reading.
Happy baking.